Hey everyone, this is Jennifer Beamer, owner-operator of ExpertlyDyed Art by Science, and this is the daily vlog, episode number 62, and today I wanted to share with you wool that I spun 10 years after making this. Okay, I wanted to start this episode with a little story. So back in 2012, I moved to Korea and I started getting these pretty fantastic paychecks for teaching English while I was there. And I had a couple of goals, one of which was to pay down some of my student loans. The other was to buy something for me. Now, when I first started spinning, I had a babe wheel, which was PVC, glue, and a few little odd bits of plastic here and there. And though it was very useful for me to transition from spindle spinning into wheel spinning, one of the other things that I wanted was something that was actually really, really beautiful. And even though the babe wheel was really, really good for a lot of reasons, I still struggled to get certain types of yarn made with it. So one of the difficulties I had was just fine-tuning the drive band so that I could get a really nice fine single. Now with my Kromski Minstrel, I can do that very easily. It's one of my go-to favorite types of yarn to make. But because I had this wonderful paycheck now in Korea, one of the things that I wanted to do was give myself something that I had never done before, which was an extravagant present. And I haven't made a purchase kind of like this since. And yeah, so I bought my wheel and the bench seat that came with it and the nitty-knotty that matched. But I also wanted to buy some wool. So I bought this wool from, I think it was Wool Gatherings, and I decided to just make something that I hadn't done before. So I wanted to work with some kind of lace pattern and this hand spun. So I bought, I think, 5 braids in total, and they were all like super fancy fibers at the time, things that I would not normally buy for myself, and even things I thought were too expensive for me to put in my shop at the time, because I was kind of running the ExpertlyDyed business on a budget, if that makes sense. So this was a blue face luster and Tencel, no, it was Firestar. It's a Firestar blend. So I think it was a 70-20. I also bought one that was a merino cashmere blend. It was like a 60-40, and that I still have a tiny little bit of it left. Unfortunately, I lost one of the 2 mittens that I made with that yarn when I was first here in the UK. So like I said, 2012, I bought this stuff, and I think I probably spun it somewhere around 2012 or 13, so it's been about 10 years since I initially spun the wool for this shawl. And of course, Layla has come to visit, and she's laying on it. There you go. As long as she's quiet, I don't mind having her here. It's just she sometimes gets loud with her meows. Anyway, so this was a shawlet, and I will have to think really hard what pattern that I used. I think it was the Ishbel shawl. I might have done a video on this ages ago, but the idea was you wore it kind of like this. Now, as you can probably see, these little ends just don't really want to hang around my neck very well. And it's not like I've got a big beefy neck, but if I pulled it tight, it's a bit uncomfortable. So it's supposed to be worn in a couple of different ways. This is one of them, which is why I chose this pattern, because it's small enough where I can like wear it, and you can see the lace patterning on it, but not so big that when I was living in Korea, I wouldn't be able to wear it for much of the year because it would be too big and heavy, and it would have to only be worn during like the dead of winter there. So for those of you who don't know, it's sort of like a subtropical climate. And the summers, they even have like a tiny monsoon season, so like 6 weeks of non-stop downpours for the most part. So I wanted something that was a little bit smaller, and unfortunately this is a bit too small, and it's not due to the fault of the pattern. I think the pattern is great. I think this comes down to two things. One, I'm a very tight knitter, and I did not do any kind of like checking for gauge or like measuring this. But you can kind of see here on the edges, I've made it almost too tight when I started each row, so it kind of just flares up here at the end. So it's too small for me, like maybe fine for, you know, a 12-year-old. And even if I wore it over my shoulders like this, I think I would still struggle because, one, my hair would cover it up, but it doesn't want to stay, right? Like I can feel it wanting to fall off my shoulders, and I have, you know, more squared off shoulders, like they're pretty substantial. So I would constantly feel like this was gonna fall off, and, you know, just, it's not comfortable. And so here I've gone through the effort to buy something that I wouldn't normally buy, spin it beautifully. I did a chain ply so that I could keep the color changes pretty consistent. And, you know, I've taken the time to, I bought this pattern, and I've taken the time to knit it. And I've literally never worn it. And it has traveled with me from Korea to the US and now to Britain. So when I was visiting my mom during the pandemic, I noticed that I had the sister skein of wool just sitting in storage, and that was because when I first came to the UK, I didn't have my wheel, and I left pretty much what wasn't absolutely necessary when I moved here in 2015. So when I was there in March of 2020, I packed this up, had it all sent to me in the UK. So it sat there for a really long time, almost 3 years. And then I decided, you know what, I'm gonna spin it. So the purpose of today's video is to sort of talk about something that I've not really done much with. I'm familiar with fractal plowing, but I haven't really done it much. In the past, in order to get these really nice, you know, preserved transitions in the color, what I did was a Navajo chain ply. So this was basically, I took the combed top, and I think I split it into 4 sections. I'm not exactly sure about this. And then I spun it all as a single. And then when I decided to ply it, I did sort of the Navajo chain ply, or like a crochet chain ply, to make a 3-ply. And that sort of results in something that kind of looks like this. And to be honest, I'm not really happy with this part of it. And that's just due to this being like the starting tab of this shawl. But with fractal plying, what you do is, if you want a 3-ply, for example, you take your braid and you split it into 3 long equal sections, and then you spin it all the same way, right? So if you start at the top end, all 3 bobbins, you start from the top end and work your way down, so you don't confuse which end you're starting from. And the idea is, if you're really consistent with your spin, the colors will line up when you ply. Now, one of the issues with a fractal ply is beyond just getting the consistency of the diameter or the grist of your yarn. The other part is how consistent is the dyeing. And this was a pretty consistent dye. So I think what happened with this particular fractal ply was I didn't divide it as evenly as I thought. So there are bits that don't quite line up. So like this bit here, you can see there's 2 strands of yellow and 1 strand of purple. And so what's happened here is I probably didn't get, so what I think probably happened here is I didn't get the 3 sections perfectly split. And then once you were spinning, given that I'm a pretty consistent spinner, and the dye was a very consistent dye job, like all the sections were, you know, nice and squared off, they weren't like wonky or anything. I think this is just because one section was slightly heavier than the other, so it wasn't, you know, 33 grams per section. It was maybe like 30 grams in one section and then more on the others, or maybe slightly different for whatever reason. And I didn't measure it before, of course, because I was very confident. The problem with that is you spin it, right? And you go to ply it, and you don't realize until you are plying it that it's a little bit off. And that was the case here. So whereas I think it's still beautiful, it doesn't have the same consistent gradient transition as this one does. And I don't know, because I've not experienced enough with fractal plying to say how to fix this. So one of the downsides of having a very curious cat is she has to get into everything. And this is a little bit of a spoiler, but I've got my furniture for my workroom, and I've got stuff just kind of set out around so that I can actually work in the room where the furniture is going. And she decided just now to scale like this stack. I made it deliberately very, very tall so she wouldn't just jump up there, but she figured out a way, so of course, always when I'm filming. So trying to pick up where my brain just was, essentially I don't know enough about fractal plying to understand where to fix a problem like this, or like how to get back on track, and what expectations really should be for this type of plying. So I've seen people do fractal plying before, and they do line up really, really well. So I think this is actually something that I would really enjoy working on in the future. Dyeing braids is a lot of fun. Dyeing them so that you could do fractal plying, it's a little different, because if you are a kind of wild dyer, so I have dyed combed top more consistently in the past. I do love just kind of putting it wherever and laying out the wool however, so that it's not necessarily super consistent, but once you spin it and you work with it, it looks really good. So what I'm probably gonna have to do is be more diligent with how I'm laying out the wool in the dyeing container and dyeing my strips so that I get these nice blocked sections. That way when I split it for fractal plowing, then, you know, I'm hoping to get a more consistent 3-ply, or it doesn't actually matter how many plies you do. You could do this as a 2-ply, you could do it as a 4-ply, 6-ply, 8-ply, whatever you'd like. It just amounts to how many strips you want to split and how many bobbins you have and the total gauge that you're going for. So I chose to do a 3-ply because I wanted something that would kind of match this yarn. And I'm not actually sure if this is the same diameter. I'm guessing that it isn't, having looked at this. So I think this is a sport weight. This was supposed to be a sport weight, but I think it's more of a double weight. Yeah, it's a little bit thick. And when I hold it up next to the knitted fabric, which is the wool that I spun 10 years ago, it looks very similar in gauge, but the only way I'll really know is when I take this apart. Which leads me to the next part of this video, which is this hand spun was kind of expensive. If you factor in the fact that I bought it in America and had it shipped to Korea, shipping, right? That was a lot. Then I had to take the time to spin it, ply it, and knit it. That's a lot of time investment as well. And because I bought something that I wouldn't normally afford, it was expensive wool, even though now it's more within my budget to buy something like this. At the time, I was initially working with ExpertlyDyed. Times were tough. So what I'm gonna do is figure out where I have woven in the end, and I'm going to unweave this. So I'm going to completely pull it apart and reclaim this yarn. And I think that's probably the best thing I could do for this shawl, because I'm never gonna wear it. I don't imagine it would work as a sold item, just because I'm not happy with it. So if I'm not happy with it, I wouldn't feel comfortable selling it. And I might want to do some kind of project where I use a 3-ply Navajo and a fractal traditional 3-ply, so with the 3 bobbins, in the same project. And I don't know what project that is. Maybe it will be something woven. I'm kind of really digging the whole woven scarf idea as a way to like get different gauges to work together or different colors to work together. So we'll see. If you have other project ideas, please post that into the comments below. I would love to hear what you have to say. So what do you think of this crazy idea of completely dismantling a project that you're not happy with? I feel like it's super practical, and it's something that people in the past probably would have done. We have evidence that people did this, but I wonder if we do this in the modern world as much, because most of us who are spinning and using that yarn for a variety of different types of fiber crafts, we're not necessarily earning our living from this, and we're not using this because our whole household depends on us to make this for them. So would you take this apart and reclaim it? Would you, I don't know, maybe turn it into felt, right? There's the blue face lesser, and then use the cut up bits of felt for a different kind of project. You know, how would you deal with a problem where you weren't happy with the result, but you've also spent a lot of time, money, and effort in order to make it? What would you do? I don't know. That's my thought so far, is just to reclaim the yarn, which may be very simplistic, but I would love to hear what your thoughts are on how you would deal with this situation. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about was what the experience was like spinning a braid of hand-dyed combed top 10 years later. Now, when I first started spinning it, it was very, very effortless, back in 2012 or 13. And I don't really have too many memories of there being difficulties. It's one of the things that should stand out in your mind, something that was, you know, tough to work with, or, you know, maybe it gave you other types of hassles, or maybe it was like the first time that you spun something that felt very effortless. Because I don't really remember what that experience was like, I'm pretty much going to say it was easy to spin and kind of a forgettable experience in that sense. I still remember doing it. I just don't remember any other details about it. So then what happens 10 years later? Now, if you have stored your wool properly, so you've put it into a breathable container, you've given it some pest control options, which I've talked about in other videos, and you don't subject it to major changes in relative humidity. So storing it in a cold barn or shed or outdoor area where it can be exposed to more damp, obviously it's going to make the fibers more brittle. If it's stored anywhere near like a sunny window, it's going to make the fibers more brittle. So this has always been stored in a dark place with some kind of pest repellent and in temperature controlled facilities. So when it was in storage while I lived in, well, it was in my mom's storage in her house when I was first living in the UK, there were no issues in terms of relative humidity because it was stored in her house. And then while it's been here with me, it's always been stored in my house in one of my plastic totes with various like lavender sachets and things and like cedar bits. So in terms of that, I didn't notice any degradation of the fiber, which is great. And the other thing, it was sort of like in a braid, like a three strand braid, or a plait, whatever you call that, plait? I don't know. So in terms of it getting compressed, it didn't. So sometimes people will post that keeping it in a braid will cause the fibers to compress and then it won't really be a joy to spin. But to be honest, that was not my experience in this case. I don't know if it's an outlier because I don't often have braids that are in that state for so long. I have a few that are approaching that and I should probably do something about it. Regardless, this spun pretty effortlessly. I didn't have to do much in the way of fluffing up the fibers. They were very easy to draft and spin. I didn't have any issues where something got a little felted or too compacted. And I was able to complete this, I think, in just a couple of evenings. So it didn't even really take me that long, and it was 4 ounces. It was 114 grams for both of these. And yeah, I think that as long as you are storing your wool appropriately, and the company that you buy it from, or if you make it yourself, has taken measures to ensure that it doesn't felt during the dyeing process or any of like the subsequent processes like wetting out the wool or rinsing it off afterwards, that can also cause felting to occur, then you can keep wool in a spinnable state that will still produce a good yarn even a decade later. What's funny is I always start off these videos thinking, oh, this will be like sub 10 minutes. And then I end up talking for another 15 minutes about other things that kind of go along with it. And then, you know, interruptions from my cat. The other one, she's down here and she is quiet. I wanted to thank my patrons on Patreon for supporting me and allowing me to continue making progress with my educational videos. Once my workroom gets all set up, I will be able to do more filming in there, more tutorials, and keeping education free. So if you want to be a fellow patron, please go to the description below where I've got a link to my Patreon account. And it is because of their monthly contributions that I was able to raise enough money to get my workroom all set up and organized so that I'm not filming in front of this window. If you want to support me in other ways, that's great. Watch this video, subscribe, like if you haven't already. You can also support me on ExpertlyDyed.com where I have my shop, and the same on Etsy, ExpertlyDyed. You can also follow my socials for any updates. So I've got Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, whichever you prefer. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Bye!